Thank you, ESPN. So it's our pleasure to introduce our next speaker. So picture this. You get an out-of-office email that says the following. I will be traveling for work in Baku, Azerbaijan, which I can't say, to Boston, Massachusetts. I challenge anybody in here who's gotten that out-of-office email from somebody this week. But that shows the schedule our next speaker keeps. And that shows how much he travels, he loves, and he works diligently for Special Olympics athletes around the world. Tim Shriver, I consider a friend and an inspiration. But there's not a soul that this torch could not have been passed. When they say pass the torch to the next generation, Mrs. Shriver did this one right. But actually, I don't get to introduce him because someone else got the right straw. So, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, again, Melissa Reilly.
Oh, you're using that one.
What? I have to agree with Mary Beth. Tim Shriver is also my inspiration and my hero. I'd like to introduce Mr. Tim Shriver.
Wow, what an evening. I thought I was speechless before the video, and now I'm sort of completely taken off my game, completely rocked, and I know that many of you are too, not because of that video, but because of this whole evening. I want to begin by congratulating the governor. I grew up in a political family. I have never seen a seated political official sit for 2 hours 6 weeks before an election day in my life. So either he's really far ahead or... but I want to congratulate you and your wife. I want to congratulate you on the leadership you've brought, the sense of emotional authenticity you brought to this stage today, which is something that is super important in our movement. To be able to express sorrow and confidence at the same time is something that most political leaders grow up thinking they're not allowed to do. And so I just want to thank you again and congratulate you on, I don't know about the Brett brothers, but congratulate you on the award. There are so many distinguished people in the room. I just want to recognize a few. I want to recognize the lead director of our movement, Professor Bill Alford of the Harvard Law School, who just this past week, who could have imagined that the Special Olympics movement would be recognized as the leading organization by the Harvard Law School? So it's an enormous honor for us and an enormous honor to be led by a man of this caliber who's leading disability rights all over the world. Grateful that Benji's here with him. I want to recognize a few former directors. Some you know, Larry Lucchino is here or was here earlier, now of the Worcester Sox as well as the Boston Red Sox. Any Worcester people here getting the baseball team, which is great. Larry's been on our team for a generation. I don't have to introduce him here, but it's worth noting that probably the most significant early believer in the Special Olympics movement in the business community in the world is in this room tonight, Peter Lynch and his daughter Annie. Peter, like the Brett family, grew up with a brother who was treated as somehow too different to belong, somehow too different to fit, but he learned to pick. What was it, Tyler? What did you say? You were one in an infinity chance? He picked stocks that were one in infinity chance, but he got the ones that came through, and but has given so much to our movement. It helped us create our early childhood program, which is now growing all over the world, among many other things. So the Lynch family is family in the Special Olympics family, and I want to thank him again. I want to congratulate Jim and the Brett family for naming an award for your brother, giving it to yourself, and then that's a good one. I got to try that. But really, the Brett family has no peer in the state of Massachusetts and nationally. I don't know whether he should be proud that he got fired from the President's Committee 2 weeks ago or not, but has been on the President's Committee, which incidentally was created by President Kennedy over 50 years ago. So, Jim, we're grateful to you for all the ways in which you've led. And Mary Beth, you have in the state of Massachusetts, I'm not going to say because this is videotape maybe, but you have the top of the top talent in the world of Special Olympics. That's 172 countries, 52. Let's give it up for Mary Beth! Yeah! Ow, ow, ow! If I were Ronan Tynan, I'd sing to you, but I'm not. So I just thought Ronan, just one or two verses of When Irish Eyes Are Smiling would have done it, but you killed it tonight, as you've done for us over and over again in Iowa, in Dublin, in New York, on so many occasions. You are also family to the Special Olympics movement. You've got a pretty good set of chords, but more than the chords, the spirit you bring to not just to your music, but to your voice as a person of high academic training, deep connection to disability and disability rights, and the capacity to resonate in our souls when you sing Wild Irish Time or Danny Boy at the bar after the show, I hope. We're so grateful, and I'm so thrilled to have you back in our midst. I know there are lots of donors and friends. The Bank of America was mentioned, John Hancock, others. But the truth is that there is no community more singularly responsible for the growth of the Special Olympics movement in the United States and around the world than law enforcement. They have no peer in terms of the money they raise, the dignity they bring to our movement, the respect they show to our athletes, the day in and day out commitment to carrying the torch in rain and snow and in cold and in heat, wherever you ask. So I would just like to ask our friends from law enforcement, who are not just the keepers of the flame, but the flame itself. So to all you men, please rise. I'd like to ask you to stand up, please, all of you. Chief Jim D.G. Inventuri, Pat Rosillo, Gary Mosiak. I want to thank you. I just want to say we drove over here from Logan, and the chief's wife said, I'm not looking. She's holding onto the seatbelt. So anyway, but it was a good ride. What can I add to what's been said tonight? Really, in some ways, very little, maybe just a personal sense of how grateful I am. Yes, on behalf of my mother, who would be so proud to be in this building. In fact, I want to say this is a beautiful presidential library, but maybe we should have a building on this point that celebrates the history of Special Olympics. I think there's a piece of land right next door. Just saying, I mean, anybody here have any juice? No, that wasn't on my script. That's off script. But she would be so proud to be here. And in some ways, even though I'm guessing almost none of you, if any, maybe none of you ever met my Aunt Rosemary, who would have been 100, I think, about 10 days ago. So that gives you some of the dating. 1918, when we heard Tyler's descriptions and Melissa's background we saw in the video, the specter, the real conditions. A world that saw people in binary choices, some good, some bad. A world that chose that binary worldview to create walls. A world that used those walls to create language that mocked, that humiliated, that taunted, that embarrassed. And in that setting, a meteor of a teacher enters into a family destined and committed to ambition and power, influence, political service, the goodness of service, the importance of service, the dignity of service. But I really only came to understand, I'd say maybe in the last 10 or so years, growing up in that family with all of its many vectors of messages and experiences, the role of this one woman. No books written about her, and if you walk through this library, because it's an accurate representation of the presidency, you will see very few pictures of her. There's many pictures of the boys, many pictures of the president's sisters, almost none of Rosemary. So even in this family in which she grew up, the stigma was so strong that when it came time for public discourse, she was largely out of sight. And I asked my mother about this over the years, and she would just repeat over and over again how she would see her mother put down the phone, a phone that was ringing not far from here in Boston, not far from here in Hyannisport on the Cape. And my mother would put down the phone and say, "There's nothing for Rosemary. Nothing. Nothing." My mother's voice would trail off, imitating my grandmother's voice. Nothing, 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 nothing. And I could hear those words echoing, another adverb maybe, another noun, another sense of what the world saw. I asked my uncle Teddy and my mom, and he used to have dinner together on Sunday nights down in Washington. We'd go over with my kids when they were younger, and one of these sort of chaotic Sunday nights. And I turned to him at one point and I said, I talked to both my mother and father, I said, have you guys ever thought about the influence Rosemary had on you as people? I said, not on the ADA or on legislation, but on you as people. My uncle sort of looked at me. Some of you did know him, and you may recognize the sort of stare at you, like not saying anything, thinking, and I was like, that usually meant that was a stupid question, and why did you ask it? But he kind of looked at me, and then he sort of cleared his throat, and he says, well, I remember this one time when we were at a party. We're going to a party. He said, Uni, you were there, and Jack was there, and we were all going over in the daytime down in Palm Beach, and Mother said, you make sure you take Rosemary. So we took Rosie with us, and I was sitting there at the party, and I looked over, and I saw Rosie. This is him telling me the story. I saw Rosie sitting in the pool. They were outdoors. With her legs in the water all by herself. And I looked over and I saw Uni, he said, and I saw Jack, and Jack was talking to all the pretty girls. And so, yeah, don't laugh, Melissa. It was it's dated. It was a different time. And he says, I saw Jack, and I saw him get up, and I saw him walk by me and go over and sit down and put his legs in the pool next to Rosemary. And he said, I saw them sitting there together, alone. And he says, I'll never forget that as long as I live. And then he turned to someone and he said, can anybody get me any food in this house? Because my house my mother was never that good on the food side of things. But it occurred to me that it was a powerful clue. That this older brother who he admired, who was popular, handsome, his role model, was getting up from the middle of the party and going over because he'd heard the echo of his mother's comments, include your sister, include your sister, include your sister. And at least the way I saw it, what he probably knew, Teddy, young boy, maybe 15 years old, 12 years old, what he probably knew right then and there was that Rosemary needed her brother. And somehow I think he knew that the brother needed her too. And that somehow that older brother knew that if he included his sister, he'd get his best self back also. That in a very competitive and tough and cutthroat world, as Jim was saying, what was that sister giving him? Just love. Just brother and sister. Nothing more, nothing less. And so when you look at these pictures in here, and we see those scenes up there of a president of the United States giving an inaugural address, What do we remember? We remember telltale words that echoed through, and it's not whether you're Republican or Democrat, it's not partisan in any way, words that echoed to the American spirit: ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do. Where did he learn that? In my view, he learned it sitting in that pool together alone, because he knew, after a lifetime of growing up with a sister who the world saw as being too different to belong, but who he saw as being the architect of his best self, that if you give of yourself, you get your best self back, and that he could stand in front of the country, and I would argue almost uniquely in American history, not in a time of war, not in a time of conflict with an external enemy, not in a time of international divisiveness, but speaking directly to his country and say, I am not here as a political leader to offer you something, I'm here to ask you. Because I was asked, he might have said, as a child, and I can tell you this is the best way to create a community, a country, a family, a church, a club, you name it, a school. And so the hidden person in this whole narrative, big and beautiful though it might be, the hidden person is Rosemary. Is the one we hardly know. Yeah. And so, and the great gift of that presidency and my mother's continued work, and now today yours, is to continue to fight the residue which still exists of binary thinking, which says some people count and some people don't, and the people that don't count deserve to live behind walls, and those people that we don't like or are too different from us to feel like we can understand them, that we should call them names and exclude them and ridicule and humiliate them. In our own time, and again, I am not speaking about politics, I'm speaking about the culture, the country, the moment, where the governor of the state of Massachusetts can stand before you and express to you his sadness at the state of our public discourse and the state of political service and the state of public enterprise. A popular, well-respected, successful governor can stand to you. He, in my view, is saying to all of us, it's our turn. It's our turn to not just think about this, but in a new way to resolve, to ask what we can do. And someone might say, well, you know, this is a movement, as the New York Times reporter said years ago, this is a movement that's all carrot and no stick. Can such a movement make a difference? You want to get your answer? Look at Melissa Reilly. Look at Tyler Lagasse. That's your answer. What did Melissa Reilly say? Everybody's nice at the State House. What if you started every session with Melissa Reilly? What if every hearing had a Special Olympics athlete? What if we imagined things differently? What if we imagined this isn't a movement for people with intellectual disabilities, but a movement from them? What if we asked ourselves what we could do to follow the Lynch family example and make every early childhood center in the state of Massachusetts an inclusive one, and include play activities for children with and without intellectual differences to play together? What if we tried to beat back all of the discrimination that exists in the healthcare system and make sure that every healthcare institution in this state trained and certified professionals to care for people with intellectual disabilities to end health disparities? What if we said that we want to have competitive, open employment for people with intellectual differences for all adults with intellectual differences in the state of Massachusetts? What if we imagined that someday the revolution that took place in Title IX in this country that said no longer will we allow for boys' sports and no girls' sports, but we will expect men and women to be able to compete together? What if we said that in every high school in the state of Massachusetts, yeah, we should have a boys basketball team, and yes, we should have a girls basketball team, and we should also have a Special Olympics unified sports basketball team in every school in the state? I submit to you we're here, yes, to recognize the past, to thank those upon whose shoulders we stand, to shed a tear for those who are not physically in the room, but who are here with us spiritually, to renew our faith in that truth, that we are in it together, that we do come from a common ground, that we do share a common human destiny, that we do cry together and pray together and hope together. We don't do that in Republican or Democratic ways, or black or white, or Latino ways, or male or female, or any of those kind of ways. This is a movement right now. The president of Azerbaijan, that's how you pronounce it, Mary Beth. The president of Azerbaijan said to me the day before yesterday, when we sat down to meet with him, this issue of inclusion is now on the global agenda, and our country needs you. He didn't say our country wants to help Tyler. He said our country needs to learn from Tyler. Yeah, oh my God, it's true. Yeah, it's true. So we are at a moment when inclusion versus exclusion is an existential question in our country. And we come with all carrot and no stick to invite people little by little, step by step, game by game, shot by shot, race by race, smile by smile, salute by salute, flame by flame, one at a time, over and over again, to see the human first, to recognize the beauty in the human spirit, which is universal, and to do everything we can to create a culture of welcome. And in that work, the athletes of Special Olympics are no longer in need of our services, and no longer in need primarily of our supports, and no longer looking for our sympathy or our empathy. They are looking for us to pay attention, to listen more than we speak, to learn from their example, and to capitalize upon the simple gifts of the human spirit to try to save our country at a time when it needs it. Now, Tyler, you said you saw Bill Cosby on TV and it really made you upset. I don't know if you've been watching TV recently and that's happened again or not. But I hope no matter what, I mean, here we are. I mean, this is one of the most divisive days in the history of the country. And what are we here doing? We're talking about unity. Well, Godspeed to each and every one of you. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for making Special Olympics Massachusetts a beacon of hope to this state. It is a gift from this state to the world, and the world is ready for you to come back to Azerbaijan, to Abu Dhabi, to 172 countries that are asking now to join not just a movement for people with intellectual disabilities, but the inclusion revolution. The inclusion revolution. The revolution of hearts and minds, the revolution with all carrots and no sticks, no weapons, no violence, no anger, no spite, no revenge, just to rebuild one at a time, one game at a time, one smile at a time, one handshake at a time, one high five at a time, one embrace of one another at a time. So at 50, we got work to do. And 50 years from now, people will look back, and I hope they'll say, man, that movement was young then. It was small. It hadn't yet expanded to every school in the country, in the world. It hadn't yet created the inclusion platforms, the digital platforms, the healthcare platforms, the early child. It hadn't done all that yet. It was just getting started. And they'll say that if and only if everyone in this room walks out of here fired up, the same way my mother was fired up. Yeah, the same way my mother was fired up and mad. Yeah. Because anger is okay. As anger is okay when it drives you towards healing. Because anger can be a messenger, and most of us, I think, are pretty angry about the state of our country right now. Not Massachusetts, Governor, but the but the country. And we got to be doggone careful to make sure we don't backslide around the issues that many of us have given our lives to. So I hope we recommit anew. I thank you all for your generous spirit. Like you, Melissa, I've been in Special Olympics all my life, literally all my life. Like those pictures, I was behind the little pony carriage and stuff like that, trying to catch up with my mother, you know, Mommy. But here we are, whether our first exposure to the movement was yesterday or whether it was 10 years ago or 50 years ago, it doesn't matter. We're here, we're ready, and I hope we resolve to build the inclusion revolution from this state again for the world. Thank you very much.